Happy day, everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something that I'm sure a lot of you can relate to, especially all our Aussie small business owners out there. It's those WordPress update emails. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
The ones that just seem to never end.
Yeah, they can be a bit much sometimes.
Right. Your inbox is just overflowing with all these notifications about every little update.
Every single one.
Exactly. And let's be real. Who actually has the time to read every single one of those emails? Especially when you're running a business, you've got a million other things on your plate.
It's all about priorities.
That's it. And that's why we're doing this deep dive today. We've got all these great articles and guides here about how to actually manage these notifications. And we're going to break it down, make it super easy to understand whether you're, a tech whiz or you're just starting out your journey with WordPress.
Absolutely.
Oh, and we'll be diving into some specific things that our Australian listeners need to keep in mind a bit later on. So stay tuned for that.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So we've got all this info and it's really interesting stuff. But, sometimes I look at those emails and I think, do I really need to know about this? Are all updates created equal or what?
That's a great question. And the truth is, while those emails can feel like a nuisance, they're actually pointing to something really crucial, and that is keeping your website safe and running smoothly.
Okay, so it's not just about, the latest bells and whistles.
Not necessarily. It's about making sure that your website is secure, that it's performing well, and that it's compatible with all the latest plugins and themes. Everything's working together in harmony.
Makes sense. I guess if you think about it like a car, you need to keep up with those regular maintenance checks to keep things running smoothly.
Exactly. And just like you wouldn't skip an oil change for your car,
Yeah.
you shouldn't ignore those WordPress updates.
So you're saying that even those small updates, those little tweaks, they can actually make a big difference.
Absolutely. WordPress is like any other software. It's constantly evolving. And those updates, even the minor ones, they're often patching security holes, fixing bugs, improving performance, and ensuring compatibility.
So what you're saying is that ignoring those updates is kind of like leaving the back door to your shop wide open.
Pretty much. You're making yourself vulnerable to hackers, crashes, all sorts of nasty surprises that you definitely don't want.
Okay. Yeah, that's a risk I'm not willing to take. And, I've actually seen this analogy in one of the articles we have. It says that trying to keep up with every single update is like having, what was it?
Bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, bigger fish to fry, exactly. Yeah. As a business owner, you've already got so much on your plate, managing your team, dealing with customers, marketing, and all that jazz.
Right. You can't afford to get bogged down in the minutia of every single update.
Exactly. It's all about working smarter, not harder, right?
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. So the question then becomes, how do we actually manage these notifications effectively? How do we find that sweet spot between staying informed and not getting completely overwhelmed?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? And thankfully, the sources we have, they actually outline two main approaches. So the first one is using plugins, which sounds pretty user-friendly.
Oh, yeah. Plugins are definitely the way to go if you're looking for a simple and effective solution.
And then there's the manual method, which I'm guessing involves a bit more technical know-how.
That's right. For those who are comfortable with coding, there's always the option of tweaking things manually, but we'll get into that a bit later.
Sounds good. So let's start with plugins, because I'll be honest, that's more my speed. I'm not exactly a coding whiz.
Yeah.
What are some of the popular options out there?
Well, the sources specifically mentioned to manage WP and automatic updates control. And these are great because they really do the heavy lifting for you.
Nice. So I don't need to be a tech genius to use them.
Not at all. Basically, you just install the plugin, activate it, and then you can customize your notification settings. You can choose what types of updates you want to be notified about, how you want to be notified, whether it's via email or some other method. And that's pretty much it.
So I can basically say, hey, WordPress only, tell me about the really important stuff, the things that could actually break my website or make it vulnerable.
Exactly. You're in control. You get to decide what level of detail you want to see.
I love that. So plugins sound pretty straightforward, but I'm curious about the manual method. For those folks who like to get their hands dirty with code, is that something worth exploring?
Yeah, for sure. If you're comfortable with coding, you can actually disable those core WordPress update emails by editing a specific file in your website's backend. It's called the functions.php file.
Okay. Functions.php. Got it.
But before I even think about going down that road, is it risky? I mean, I don't want to accidentally break my website. That's a valid concern. And it's why I always emphasize caution when it comes to making manual changes. You should always back up your website before you even think about touching any code, because, one wrong character and things could go haywire.
Yeah, no thanks. I think I'll be sticking with plugins for now. But, we can't forget about our Aussie listeners because I remember reading in the source material that there are some extra considerations when it comes to WordPress updates down under right.
You're absolutely right. Australia has these things called digital service requirements, which are basically rules and regulations about how you operate your website, particularly when it comes to things like cybersecurity and protecting customer data.
So it's not just about keeping those hackers out, it's also about making sure I'm following all the rules here in Australia.
Precisely, Australian businesses, they have a responsibility to be proactive when it comes to online security and protecting their customers' information.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'm guessing we'll be diving deeper into these Australian regulations in the next part of our deep dive.
Absolutely. We'll unpack all the details and give you some practical tips on how to make sure your website is ticking all the boxes.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. So we've talked about why those WordPress updates are so important. We've explored plugins as a user-friendly way to manage those notifications. And we've touched on the unique considerations for our Australian listeners. Now, in part 2, we'll be diving headfirst into those Australian digital service requirements, and we'll be looking at how they tie into managing your WordPress site. So stay tuned.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. As promised, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of those Australian digital service requirements. So for our Aussie listeners out there, this is particularly relevant to you.
All right, let's break it down.
Yeah.
What exactly makes Australia different when it comes to managing those WordPress updates? I mean, is it really that much more complicated?
Well, it's not necessarily about being more complicated, but it's definitely about being more aware. You see, Australia has this pretty comprehensive set of rules and regulations called digital service requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And these guidelines essentially dictate how you run your website, especially when it comes to cybersecurity and protecting your customers' data.
Okay, so it's not just about, keeping my website safe from hackers. It's also about making sure I'm following all the rules and regulations here in Australia.
You got it. Think of it like a building inspection. The inspector comes and checks if your building meets all the safety codes. Well, in the online world, your website needs to meet the codes for security and data protection in Australia.
I like that analogy. So it's kind of like a digital safety check for my website.
Exactly. And the thing is, Australian businesses are expected to be proactive when it comes to online security and protecting their customers' information. It's not just a good idea, it's a must.
So I can't just bury my head in the sand and hope for the best.
Not if you want to stay on the right side of the law. Now, how does this all tie back to those WordPress updates we were talking about earlier? Well, while there isn't a specific rule that says you must update your website every X number of days, the general idea is that you need to show you're taking reasonable steps to keep your online space secure and up to date.
So it's like changing the locks on your doors. You wouldn't wait until after a break-in to do it, right?
Precisely. It's about being proactive rather than reactive. So if your website is running on outdated software with known security holes, and let's say you get hacked, well, you could actually find yourself in hot water because you haven't taken those necessary steps to protect your website and your customers' data.
Yikes. Okay, that's definitely food for thought. I mean, no one wants to deal with the fallout of a security breach, especially when it could have been prevented.
Absolutely. And that's why those update emails, even though they can be annoying, they're actually really important signals that you need to pay attention to.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture here. But I have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by all this talk of rules and regulations. Is there anything I can do to make sure I'm on the right track? Besides just hitting that update button every time I get an email.
Don't worry, you're not alone. The good news is that there are resources available to help you navigate all of this. One of the sources we have actually recommends having a chat with a local expert, someone who really understands the ins and outs of these Australian digital service requirements.
Ah, so like a translator who can help me decipher all the legal jargon and make sense of it all.
Exactly. They can take a look at your website, identify any potential compliance gaps, and help you get things sorted. So, it's not just about blindly installing the latest updates. It's about understanding why those updates matter and making sure your website is aligned with those Australian standards.
So it's like having a digital safety net.
Exactly. It's about taking a holistic approach where security and compliance go hand in hand.
Okay, that's starting to make a lot more sense. Now, I know some of our listeners might be thinking, this all sounds way too technical for me, and I get it. But the good news is you don't have to go it alone. Remember those professional website management services we talked about earlier? They can be a lifesaver, especially if you're not comfortable with the technical side of things or simply don't have the time to dedicate to it.
You're right, delegating can be a smart move, especially when it comes to something as important as website security and compliance.
Mm-hmm.
Find experts who specialize in Australian compliance. Let them handle the technical stuff so you can focus on running your business.
So we've established that staying updated is crucial. And in Australia, it's not just about keeping your website running smoothly, but also about making sure you're ticking all the boxes when it comes to those digital service requirements. But let's be real, those update emails can be a real pain in the, you know what? How do we strike that balance between staying informed without being bombarded by those notifications?
That's where it comes down to finding a system that works for you. Remember those handy plugins we talked about earlier? Manage WP and automatic updates control. They can really help you filter out the noise and take control of those notifications.
Yeah, I like the idea of having more control over what I see and when I see it. So I'm not constantly feeling like I'm playing catch up.
Exactly. You can customize those settings so you're only being notified about the crucial stuff. And don't forget about those other tips we discussed, like subscribing to reputable WordPress blogs and scheduling those regular website checkups. It's all about being proactive and staying ahead of the game.
So it sounds like it's all about taking a proactive approach, finding a system that works for me, and knowing when to call in the experts, especially here in Australia, where those digital service requirements add another layer of complexity.
You nailed it. Knowledge is power. And in the online world, that power comes from understanding not just the technical aspects of running a website, but also the legal and regulatory landscape you're operating in.
Well said. So to our listeners, stay informed, stay curious, and most importantly, stay compliant. Now, in part 3, we'll be wrapping things up with some final thoughts and actionable takeaways, so stay tuned.
All right, welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into taming those WordPress update emails. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have. And I have to say, I'm feeling a lot more confident about managing those updates now.
That's great to hear. So before we wrap things up, let's just recap those key takeaways. Make sure everyone's walking away with actionable insights.
Yeah, let's do it.
First and foremost, those WordPress updates, they're not the enemy. They're actually essential for keeping your website secure and running smoothly. And as we've learned, especially here in Australia, they're crucial for staying compliant with those digital service requirements.
Right. It's not just about avoiding those annoying emails. It's about protecting your business.
Exactly. And the good news is you don't have to be a tech whiz to stay on top of it all.
Yeah.
We've talked about plugins like Manage WP and automatic updates control, which make managing those updates a breeze.
And even if you are a bit more tech savvy, there's always that manual option. But, proceed with caution.
Always back up your website before making any changes. Now, for our Aussie listeners, remember those digital service requirements. They're not just suggestions, they're the law. So make sure you're familiar with them and that your website's ticking all the boxes.
And if you're not sure where to start, don't hesitate to reach out to a local expert. They can help you navigate those requirements and make sure your website's up to snuff.
Absolutely. Now, I want to leave you with one final thought. We've been talking about those update emails, but that's really just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to optimizing your WordPress site.
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
So think about it. What other areas of your website could you improve? Could you boost your website's loading speed? Are you making the most of SEO? Are there tasks you could automate or delegate to free up your time?
So many possibilities.
Exactly. It's all about continuous improvement, finding those little tweaks and optimizations that can make a big difference for your business.
So to all our listeners out there, keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible with your WordPress site. And until next time, happy WordPressing.